The skies of Draconis Prime rained destruction, as human warships bombarded the last stronghold of Galactic Tyranny into rubble. After 500,000 years of iron-fisted alien domination, humanity was finally bringing freedom to a broken galaxy. Corporal Derek Ross stood amidst the ruins of a once great alien city, now reduced to toppled skyscrapers and smouldering craters. His armor, pitted and scorched from weeks of brutal urban combat, clanked as he stepped over the bodies of dead Draconis warriors. "Eagle Actual, this is Corporal Ross." Derek spoke into his helmet comlink, his voice raspy with exhaustion. "Objective secured. The Draconis governor is dead, along with his elite guard. But Eagle Squad is gone, sir. It's just me now." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the comm. When his commander replied, the man's voice was thick with emotion. "Copy that, Corporal. You've done humanity proud. Fall back to the extraction point for evac. We'll make sure the squad's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Derek's shoulders slumped as he ended the transmission. He'd known most of Eagle Squad since basic training. Good soldiers, all of them, friends. But they'd known the risks when they volunteered for this mission. The Draconis were the most brutal and entrenched galactic empire in history. Toppling them was never going to be easy. Derek unslung his pulse rifle and started the long, lonely trek back to the human forward operating base, 10 clicks outside the ruined city. He'd barely gone 100 meters when a sound made him freeze. A muffled cry coming from beneath a collapsed wall nearby. Derek whirled, dropping into a combat crouch and bringing his rifle to bear. "Who's there?" he snarled. "Come out now." There was a scrabbling sound, then a reptilian head emerged from the rubble. It was a young Draconis male, his scales pale with concrete dust. The alien's serpentine lower body was pinned beneath a massive slab of ferrocrete. Luminous yellow eyes locked with Derek's, as the alien raised trembling hands in surrender. "Please, human," the Draconis croaked in broken Terran. "Help me, I beg you." Derek's finger tightened on the trigger. The Draconis had spent the last 500,000 years enslaving and slaughtering their way across the galaxy. They'd killed billions, destroyed entire civilizations, and erased them from history. And now, at long last, humanity was bringing the tyrants to their knees. Slowly, Derek lowered his rifle. As much as he longed to put a plasma bolt through the alien's skull and leave him to rot, the man hesitated. Maybe it was the Draconis' youth. Maybe it was the naked fear and pain in those reptilian eyes. But despite everything the Draconis had done, Derek found he couldn't pull the trigger. Not in cold blood. Not like this. He stepped forward, and the alien flinched, clearly expecting a killing blow. But Derek merely fired 2 precise shots from his rifle, vaporizing the rubble pinning the Draconis' tail. The alien blinked up at him in shock as Derek turned away. "Get out of here, Draconis," the human growled, "before I change my mind." There was a scrabbling sound as the alien dragged himself free of the rubble and began to slither away. But after a few meters he paused, looking back at Derek. "You think you humans are the first to challenge the Draconis Empire?" The alien spoke, his voice tinged with bitter amusement. "A dozen races rose up against us. Over the centuries, all failed, all were crushed." Despite himself, Derek paused. "What are you talking about?" The Draconis barked a harsh laugh. "The Xor, the Vrukari, the Kilidar, you've never heard of them, have you? Entire species, wiped out and erased from existence when they dared defy Draconis rule. What makes you think humanity will be any different?" Derek met that reptilian gaze steadily. "We'll be different because we don't lose," he replied simply. Then he shouldered his rifle and resumed his long march to safety, leaving the Draconis to ponder those words amidst the ruins of all he had ever known. As he walked beneath the smoke-choked sky, Derek felt a flicker of doubt. The war had barely begun, and Eagle Squad was already gone. If the Draconis' youth was right, and so many other races had risen up only to be crushed, did humanity really stand a chance? Derek shook his head firmly, banishing the dark thoughts. It didn't matter what had come before. Mankind would prevail. They had to. The alternative was 500,000 more years of tyranny and death. Resolve hardening, Derek quickened his pace towards extraction. The first small step in the greatest and most desperate war the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity would bring freedom to the stars, or die trying. Several weeks passed since Derek's fateful encounter on Draconis Prime. He found himself back at the human military encampment, a fortified outpost built into the pockmarked surface of a gas giant's moon. Derek strode through the base's labyrinthine corridors, the weight of his debriefing with General Graves heavy on his shoulders. General Graves, a grizzled veteran with steel-grey hair and a face etched by decades of hard warfare, looked up from a flickering holographic display of the Draconis system. He returned the salute. "At ease, Corporal. I read your report on the liberation of the capital. Damned fine work down there, Derek allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Thank you, sir. Eagle Squad didn't die for nothing." Graves nodded, but his expression remained grave. "Your report also mentioned a young Draconis soldier you encountered, one who tried to warn you about previous failed uprisings against the Empire." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, sir, but I didn't put much stock in what he said, probably just trying to rattle us." The general leaned forward, his gaze intense. "That same Draconis surrendered himself to our forces just a day after your run-in. Says his name is Janus, and that he's the son of some high muckety-muck in the Empire's ruling caste." Derek blinked in surprise. "He surrendered? Why?" "Claims he wants to help us bring down the Empire. Says he can give us intel on their defenses, supply lines, weak points, the whole shebang." Derek hesitated. "I don't know, sir. This Janus kid, he seemed sincere, scared even. And if he really does have info on those other uprisings—" The general cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I'm not dismissing it out of hand, Corporal. That's why I'm sending you to interrogate this Janus character. See if you can sort the truth from the bullshit." Derek swallowed hard. "Understood, sir." Minutes later, Derek found himself standing outside a cell in the base's brig, staring through the humming force field at the Draconis youth huddled within. Janus looked up as Derek approached, his serpentine eyes widening in recognition. "You," the alien rasped. "The human from the city. I knew you'd see reason. I knew you'd understand why I'm doing this." Derek crossed his arms, face impassive. "I'm here for information, Janus, that's all. Tell me about the Draconis vulnerabilities, their supply chains, their command structure, anything that can help us win this war." Janus drew himself up, a flicker of defiance crossing his features. "I'll tell you what you want to know, but only if you give me your word that you'll use this information to help free my people. The Draconis have enslaved us for centuries. We deserve liberation, just as much as you." Derek's jaw clenched. "Humanity is fighting for survival, Janus. This isn't some grand crusade to save the galaxy. It's us or them. We don't have the luxury of worrying about anyone else." Janus hissed in frustration. "Then how are you any better than the Draconis, if you're willing to leave us in chains just for your own selfish interests?" Derek opened his mouth to retort, but was interrupted by a klaxon blaring through the brig. Red warning lights strobed along the corridor. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Alert! Long-range sensors detect multiple warp signatures entering the system. Configuration matches known Draconis battle formations. Estimated time to—" The voice cut off in a burst of static. In the cell, Janus began to laugh, a bitter, jagged sound. "You should have killed me when you had the chance, human. The Draconis let me escape. Let me lead them right to your hidden base. And now they're coming to burn it to the ground." Icy realization flooded Derek's veins. The surrender, the offer of information, it had all been a ruse, a ploy to lure the human forces into a trap. He spun on his heel and sprinted for the command center, screaming into his comlink. A thunderous boom shook the base to its foundations. In the brig, the force field confining Janus flickered and died as the first Draconis plasma torpedoes slammed into the moon's surface, heralding the start of a battle that would decide the fate of the system, and perhaps the galaxy itself. Derek sprinted through the rubble-strewn corridors of the base, his heart pounding in his chest. The walls shook as Draconis plasma torpedoes slammed into the moon's surface, each impact sending showers of sparks and debris raining down from the ceiling. He burst into the hangar bay where a scene of barely controlled chaos greeted him. Human pilots and ground crew scrambled to their ships, prepping for the desperate counterattack. Fighter engines roared to life, filling the air with deafening noise and scorching exhaust. Derek vaulted into the cockpit of his own craft, a lean and lethal Raptor-class superiority fighter. As he powered up the systems and donned his helmet, a flash of movement caught his eye. There, slithering across the hangar floor towards a battered transport shuttle, was Janus. The treacherous Draconis youth must have used the bombardment as cover to slip away in the confusion. For a split second, Derek's hand tightened on the flight stick, every instinct screaming at him to train his guns on the fleeing alien and blow him to atoms. But he hesitated. The Draconis warfleet was the real threat here. Every second he delayed was a second they grew closer to annihilating the base and everyone in it. With a muttered curse, Derek wrenched his eyes away from Janus and slammed his thrusters to full power. The Raptor leapt from its docking clamps like a caged animal finally unleashed, streaking out of the hangar and into the storm of battle raging overhead. All around him, the sleek dart shapes of human fighters clashed with the bulbous, organic-looking Draconis ships in a dizzying swarm of fire and metal. Lances of plasma crisscrossed the void, each one capable of vaporizing an unlucky craft in an instant. Derek threw his Raptor into a screaming dive, pulse pounding as a trio of plasma bolts sizzled past his cockpit close enough to scorch the canopy. The human ships were faster and nimbler, dancing effortlessly between the cumbersome Draconis craft. But the reptilians had numbers on their side, and they pressed that advantage mercilessly. For every enemy ship the humans destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Derek gritted his teeth and flung himself into the fray with reckless abandon. His targeting computer wailed with proximity alerts as he threaded a dizzying path through the heart of the Draconis formation, cannons and missiles lashing out in every direction. One by one the alien ships vanished from his scopes in bursts of fire and shrapnel. A savage grin split Derek's face as his kill count mounted. 10, 20. The Draconis ships were slow and clumsy, their pilots hopelessly outclassed. This wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Maybe Janus's warnings had been nothing but smoke and mirrors after all. Maybe this would be the day humanity broke the Draconis' grip on the galaxy once and for. A thunderous roar shook the battlefield, a sound like the sky itself being torn asunder. Derek's head whipped around, his momentary elation turning to ashes in his mouth. There, ploughing through the maelstrom of dogfighting craft like an icebreaker through a frozen sea, came the Draconis flagship. It was a monster, easily 20 times the size of the next largest craft on the field. More fortress than ship, its pitted and scarred hull bristled with enough firepower to scour a planet clean of life, and every weapon was now aimed squarely at the beleaguered human fleet. "All ships, emergency recall," Derek barked into his comms, already throwing his Raptor into a gut-wrenching climb. "Regroup at fallback coordinates. We can't win this. We have to—" The Dreadnought's guns spoke again, and the human frigate Dauntless, tasked with securing their escape vector, exploded into a miniature sun. Derek swore viciously. They couldn't run, not without a clear path to the FTL translation point. The Draconis had them boxed in, trapped between the anvil of the flagship's guns and the hammer of its fighter screen. There was only one chance, slim as it was. Derek gritted his teeth and slammed his throttle to maximum, aiming his Raptor straight at the heart of the enemy flagship. Massed Draconis fire converged on him from every direction, turning space into a storm of light and shrapnel. Derek flew like a man possessed, juking and weaving through the maelstrom by margins so narrow they defied belief. He could see his target now, growing larger with each passing second. The armored viewport of the flagship's bridge. If he could just put a missile into that one weak spot, decapitate the ship's command crew, then maybe, just maybe. Derek's world turned white. Proximity alarm screamed. His shields flared, died. The bone-jarring slam of a direct hit shook the Raptor like a kicked soda can. The console before him exploded in a fountain of sparks and smoke, and searing pain lanced through his hands, his face. Fighting for control of his stricken craft, Derek let loose a salvo of his last missiles. Moments before a second hit sent him careening off into space, trailing fire and shredded metal. Through a red haze of pain, he watched his weapons streak towards the Draconis flagship's bridge and detonate harmlessly against its shields, a firefly's sting against a mountain. As the battered remains of the human fleet limped towards the FTL point, Draconis ships harrying them every step of the way, Derek could only watch helplessly through his cracked and flickering canopy. The base fell away behind them, its once proud structures now little more than craters and rubble, the smoking funeral pyre of humanity's shattered ambitions. But even as despair threatened to choke him, Derek felt a cold, hard knot of rage crystallize in his gut. The Draconis had won this battle. Janus' betrayal had seen to that, but the war was far from over. As the ragtag fleet made the jump to FTL, leaving their burning outpost behind, Derek made a silent vow amidst the ruin of his cockpit. The shattered remnants of the human strike force limped through the void, trailing smoke and debris. Their ships were battered, their numbers decimated, but still they flew, the last stubborn embers of defiance in a galaxy gone dark. They came to rest in the shadow of a nameless moon, little more than an airless rock hanging in the endless night, but it would serve as sanctuary, however fleeting, a place to nurse wounds and whisper prayers for the fallen. Derek Ross stepped onto the moon's blasted surface, feeling the crunch of lifeless dust beneath his boots. He moved through the hastily erected camp like a wraith, barely hearing the murmured condolences of the battered survivors he passed. The ghosts of Eagle Squad haunted his every step, their absence a raw and bleeding wound. He found General Graves in the command tent, hunched over a flickering holomap of the Draconis system. The man looked up as Derek entered, his face etched with exhaustion and grief. The general met his gaze, his eyes hard as flint. "I won't mince words, Corporal. That was a goddamn disaster. We went in cocky and got our asses handed to us. The Draconis played us for fools." Derek's jaw clenched. They couldn't have done it without Janus. That lying snake fed us right into their trap. Graves's fist slammed onto the holomap, scattering motes of light. "And I let it happen. I should never have entertained that traitor's poisoned words. I should have put a bolt in his skull the moment he slithered into camp." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the soft chirp of the holomap. Finally Graves straightened, his face hardening into a mask of resolve. "This isn't over, Corporal. We're bloodied, but not beaten. We'll rally what's left of our forces, strike back harder, faster." "With all due respect, sir," Derek interrupted, "that's not going to work, not anymore." Derek leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "We've been fighting the Draconis like they're just another enemy, sir. But they're not. They're an empire. Crushing rebellions is what they do. It's what they've done for thousands of years." He jabbed a finger at the holomap, tracing the vast swathes of space marked with the Draconis sigil. "They're too big, too powerful. We can't beat them in a straight fight, but we don't have to." Graves frowned. "What are you suggesting, Corporal?" Derek's eyes glittered with a hard, cold light. "Cut off the serpent's head and the body dies. We take out the Draconis Emperor, and their whole rotten empire will collapse like a house of cards." The general barked a humorless laugh. "Assassinate the Emperor. On the Draconis homeworld, it's suicide." "Maybe," Derek allowed. "But it's the only move we have left, the only one they won't see coming." Graves studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "All right, Corporal, we'll play this your way. But you're not going in alone. I'll assemble a strike team." "No," Derek cut in, his voice brooking no argument. "This has to be a solo op, one man in and out like a ghost. Anyone else would just slow me down." The general's face darkened with reluctance, but he didn't argue. "I don't like it, but I trust your judgment. You'll have the best gear we can muster. State-of-the-art stealth tech, experimental weapons, the works." Derek nodded curtly. "I'll make it count, sir." Hours later, as a sleek black ship slipped from the moon's shadow and vanished into the stars, Derek sat at its controls, his face set with grim purpose. The Draconis homeworld waited, a glittering jewel in the void, its skies swarming with warships. Infiltrating it would be the greatest challenge of his life. The Emperor would be guarded by legions of his most loyal warriors, shielded by the most advanced defenses in the known universe. Every moment on that planet would be a dance on a razor's edge, a heartbeat from discovery and death. But Derek could not turn back. Too much had been lost, too many sacrifices made. The ghosts of Eagle Squad cried out for vengeance, and he would see it done, even if it cost him everything. As his ship streaked towards the heart of the Draconis Empire, Derek's mind raced, planning, calculating, searching for any weakness he could exploit. But even as he plotted the Emperor's downfall, a small, treacherous voice whispered in the back of his mind. He had been so certain, so convinced that this was the only way. But now, with the point of no return fast approaching, doubt began to gnaw at his resolve. Was this truly the path to victory? Or was he simply charging headlong into yet another trap, driven by grief and rage? The Draconis homeworld loomed before him, a glittering emerald orb shrouded in swirling clouds. Derek guided his ship into the planet's atmosphere, his jaw clenched with tension. The stealth systems were engaged, cloaking his approach, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the Draconis detected his presence. Derek wrenched the controls, sending the ship into a wild corkscrew. But it was too late. A thunderous impact shook the craft, warning lights flashing red across the console. He was hit, and hit bad. Smoke filling the cockpit, Derek fought to keep the ship steady, steering towards a dense jungle that covered much of the planet's surface. If he could just reach those trees, he might be able to ditch the ship, continue the mission on foot. But the Draconis weren't about to make it easy for him. Energy blasts sizzled past the cockpit, so close he could feel their heat through the canopy. The ship shuddered under the onslaught, its systems failing one by one. With a muttered curse, Derek reached for the eject lever. He'd barely wrapped his fingers around it when a final, devastating blast turned his world into a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel. The next thing he knew, he was plummeting through the air, the jungle rushing up to meet him. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs, stars exploding across his vision. For a long moment he lay there, dazed and bleeding, the taste of blood sharp in his mouth. Then, slowly, painfully, he dragged himself to his feet. His ship was a twisted ruin a short distance away, flames licking at its crumpled hull. But Derek had no time to mourn its loss, because emerging from the trees all around him were Draconis soldiers, their scales glinting in the dappled sunlight, their energy rifles trained squarely on his chest. Derek's hand twitched towards his sidearm, his mind racing through the scenarios. He was outnumbered and outgunned. Even if he managed to take a few of them down, he'd be dead before he could blink. And then his mission, humanity's last hope, would die with him. Slowly, hating himself with every fiber of his being, Derek raised his hands in surrender. The Draconis closed in, their reptilian faces twisted with triumph. As they wrenched his arms behind his back, binding his wrists with energy cuffs, a single thought pulsed through Derek's mind over and over again. And this couldn't be how it ended. He wouldn't let it be. Somehow, someway, he would finish what he started. He would see the Emperor dead at his feet, even if it was the last thing he ever did. But as the Draconis marched him towards a waiting transport ship, their clawed hands tight on his arms, Derek couldn't shake the sinking feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. That, in his hunger for vengeance, he had doomed not only himself, but the entire human race. And now, as the transport ship lifted off, carrying him deeper into the heart of the Draconis Empire, Derek could only wonder what fresh horrors awaited him, and whether he would have the strength to face them. Derek was marched through the opulent halls of the Draconis Palace, his hands bound behind his back, his face bruised and bloodied from the crash. The reptilian guards on either side of him were silent, their clawed hands gripping his arms with vice-like strength. He expected to be thrown into a dank cell, or perhaps hauled off to an interrogation chamber for a brutal questioning. Instead, The massive doors ahead of him swung open, revealing a cavernous throne room. The chamber was a monument to Draconis' conquest and cruelty. The walls were adorned with trophies from vanquished worlds, shattered weapons, burned flags, and the skeletal remains of alien leaders who had dared to defy the Empire. The air was thick with the cloying scent of incense and the metallic tang of blood. And there, on a raised dais at the far end of the room, sat the Draconis Emperor himself. He was an ancient and massive specimen, his scales scarred from centuries of battle, his body augmented with gleaming cybernetics, his eyes, one organic and one a glowing red implant, fixed on Derek with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The guards forced Derek to his knees before the Emperor, their claws digging into his shoulders. Derek gritted his teeth, refusing to show pain or fear. To his surprise, it was the Emperor who spoke first, his voice a guttural rumble that filled the chamber. "Derek Ross," he said, tasting the name like a fine wine. "The human who liberated Draconis Prime, the one who destroyed my dreadnought." Derek remained silent, meeting the Emperor's gaze defiantly. "I must admit I am impressed by your audacity," the Emperor continued. "You fight with a skill and determination rare among your kind, but you have also caused great damage to my empire. That cannot go unanswered." Derek saw an opening, a chance to perhaps end this war before more lives were lost. He straightened as much as his captors would allow. "I offer you a deal," he said, his voice ringing out in the cavernous space. "Surrender now, release the worlds you've enslaved. Do this, and I'll spare your life." For a moment there was silence. Then the Emperor threw back his head and laughed, a harsh grating sound that set Derek's teeth on edge. "You presume to bargain with me," the Emperor said when his laughter had subsided. "The Draconis do not negotiate with lesser species. We conquer, we rule. That is the natural order of things." He leaned forward, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on Derek. "Even now my fleets are launching a counterattack against your territories. Your comrades will be wiped out, your worlds burned to cinders, and you will live just long enough to see it happen." Rage surged through Derek's veins. With a roar, he lunged at the Emperor, straining against his bonds. The guards yanked him back, slamming him to the floor. The Emperor watched this display with amusement. "Such spirit," he mused. "Perhaps we should make an example of you, a public execution in the arena, to show all the galaxy what happens to those who defy the Draconis." He gestured languidly to the guards. "Take him away." As Derek was dragged from the throne room, a movement in the shadows behind the throne caught his eye. He turned his head, straining to see. His blood ran cold. There, half hidden in the darkness, stood Janus. The traitorous Draconis youth met Derek's gaze, his serpentine eyes glinting with malice. The realization hit Derek like a punch to the gut. Janus must have used his knowledge of human tactics and technology to help plan the Draconis counterattack. He had played them all for fools. As the throne room doors slammed shut behind him, and he was hauled away to an uncertain fate, a terrible thought crept into Derek's mind. What if this had been the Draconis' plan all along? What if humanity's rebellion had been doomed from the very start? Derek was dragged into a massive coliseum, the roar of the Draconis crowd filling his ears. They jeered and hissed as he was thrown into the dusty arena, his hands unbound and a crude spear tossed at his feet. He looked up, squinting against the harsh sun, and saw the Emperor himself seated in a grand box above, Janus at his side. Both looked down at him with cold, pitiless eyes. A portcullis at the far end of the arena began to rise with a grinding clank. Derek gripped his spear tightly as an ungodly roar echoed from the darkness beyond. Then the beast emerged, and his blood ran cold. It was a monstrosity, a nightmarish fusion of a dozen apex predators. It had the crushing jaws of a Fangarian deathhound, the venomous barbs of a Kilidar sand viper, the armored hide of a Xor mountain behemoth. It lumbered into the arena on 6 powerful legs, its massive head swinging back and forth as it sought its prey. The crowd's cheers reached a fever pitch as the chimera caught sight of Derek. It let out a bone-shaking roar and charged, its claws gouging furrows in the sand. Derek rolled aside at the last second, feeling the wind of its passing. He came up in a crouch, spear at the ready, as the beast wheeled around for another pass. This time Derek held his ground until the last possible moment. As the chimera lunged, jaws wide, he sidestepped and rammed his spear into its neck. But the point skittered off the creature's armored hide, barely leaving a scratch. The beast backhanded him with a casual swipe of its paw, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, the breath driven from his lungs. The chimera stalked towards him, its eyes glinting with savage intelligence. Derek scrambled backwards, his hand closing around his spear. He surged to his feet and met the beast's charge head-on, ducking under its snapping jaws and thrusting his spear into its chest. Again the point failed to penetrate, and he was forced to retreat as the chimera pressed its attack. They clashed again and again, Derek using every ounce of his agility to stay one step ahead of the creature's slashing claws and snapping teeth. But he was tiring, his reflexes slowing, while the beast seemed tireless. Blood ran from a dozen shallow cuts on his arms and torso. Now it was all Derek could do to stay alive, darting and weaving between the two beasts as they tried to corner him. He was gasping for breath, his vision blurring with exhaustion. He knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. The larger chimera lunged, its jaws closing around his spear. With a wrench of its mighty neck, it tore the weapon from his grasp, leaving him defenseless. The other beast moved in, sensing weakness, its barbed tail lashing in anticipation. As it reared up for the killing blow, Derek saw it, a small gap in the armor at the base of its neck just below the jaw hinge. A desperate plan formed in his mind. He scooped up a handful of sand and flung it into the beast's face, making it recoil with a hiss of surprise. In that moment of distraction, Derek leapt forward, jamming his arm into the gap in the chimera's armor up to the elbow. He groped blindly, his fingers closing around something soft and pulsing, the beast's throat. With a savage cry, he tore it out in a gout of hot blood. The chimera convulsed, a horrible gurgling sound issuing from its ruined neck. It collapsed to the sand and lay still, its lifeblood pooling around Derek's feet. He stood over it, chest heaving, his arm drenched in gore to the shoulder. A stunned silence fell over the arena. Then, slowly, a murmur of disbelief swept through the Draconis spectators. No one had expected the human to survive, let alone triumph. In the Emperor's box, Janus turned to his master with a look of shock and alarm. But the Emperor's face was a mask of rage. He surged to his feet, his cybernetic eye blazing crimson. The guards leveled their weapons at Derek, fingers tightening on triggers. He tensed, preparing to dodge, though he knew it was hopeless. He was wounded, exhausted, and hopelessly outnumbered. Suddenly a thunderous boom shook the arena, sending a geyser of sand and rubble erupting from the far wall. Derek shielded his eyes from the blast, his ears ringing. As the dust cleared, he saw a gaping hole where the wall had been, and beyond it. His heart leapt. Human dropships, dozens of them, pouring through the breach like avenging angels. They opened fire as they came, strafing the stands with blasts of plasma fire. Draconis soldiers and spectators alike scattered in panic, trampling each other in their haste to escape. In the chaos, Derek spotted a familiar figure beckoning to him from the mouth of the breach, General Graves, a plasma rifle in his hands and a fierce grin on his face. "Come on, Corporal," he shouted over the din of battle. "Let's get you out of here." Derek didn't need to be told twice. Ignoring the pain of his wounds, he sprinted for the gap, ducking and weaving through the hail of plasma bolts and falling rubble. He leapt through the breach just as a human gunship swooped overhead, raking the Emperor's box with a barrage of missiles. As the explosions bloomed behind him, Derek allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Draconis had underestimated humanity for the last time. The Emperor would pay for his arrogance, and Janus for his betrayal. But the fight was far from over. As he clambered aboard a waiting dropship, Derek knew this was only the beginning. The real battle for the fate of the galaxy was still to come. As the battle raged in the skies above, the thunderous booms of explosions and the shrill whine of energy weapons echoing through the halls of the palace, Derek raced through the labyrinthine corridors. He moved with the swift, silent grace of a hunting cat, his footsteps barely a whisper on the polished stone floors. His eyes darted left and right, constantly scanning for any sign of the Draconis guards. He rounded a corner and came face to face with a pair of the reptilian soldiers. They hissed in surprise, their clawed hands darting for their weapons, but Derek was faster. He lunged forward, his combat knife flashing in the dim light. The blade found the gap between the first guard's armor plates, sinking deep into the alien's throat. The Draconis gurgled, green blood bubbling from the wound as it collapsed. The second guard managed to draw its plasma pistol, but Derek was already moving. He spun, the energy bolt sizzling past his ear as he closed the distance. His knife lashed out, severing the tendons in the Draconis' gun hand. The pistol clattered to the floor, and Derek followed up with a savage kick to the alien's knee, shattering the joint. As the guard crumpled, Derek silenced its pained shriek with a swift slice across the throat. Barely breaking stride, Derek continued his headlong sprint through the palace. He knew he had little time before the Emperor's escape ship departed. If the Draconis ruler managed to flee, the war would drag on for years, decades even. Millions more would die. Derek burst into the Emperor's private chambers just as the massive Draconis was slithering towards a hidden elevator, no doubt leading to a hangar bay. The Emperor whirled, his cybernetic eye gleaming crimson, his face a mask of shock and rage. "You," he snarled, drawing himself up to his full, imposing height. "The human filth that dares defy the Draconis Empire." Derek raised his knife, settling into a combat stance. "Your empire ends today, tyrant." The Emperor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stand against me, ape? I have crushed 1,000 races beneath my heel." With a roar, the Emperor lunged, his cybernetic claws extended. Derek ducked under the first swipe, feeling the rush of displaced air above his head. He retaliated with a slash of his knife, but the Emperor's scales turned the blade, sparks flying. They traded blows back and forth. The Emperor's raw strength and augmented speed matched by Derek's agility and skill. The chamber shook with the force of their clash, ancient artifacts tumbling from their pedestals and shattering on the floor. As they locked in a grapple, the Emperor's face inches from his own, Derek gritted out, "Why? Why do all this? The conquest, the slaughter?" The Emperor's lipless mouth curled in a sneer. "You could never understand, human. The Draconis are destined to rule. It is our birthright, our duty, to impose order on a chaotic universe." He shoved Derek back, sending him stumbling. And yet there was a prophecy. Whispers of our downfall at the hands of an unknown warrior from an unknown race. When you humans first appeared, with your strange technology and your defiant spirit, I feared you might be the ones spoken of. Derek circled warily, looking for an opening. "So that's why you tried to wipe us out? Because of some ancient superstition?" "I could not take the risk," the Emperor hissed. "I would burn 1,000 worlds to ashes to keep the Draconis in power, and I will start with yours." He lunged again, his claws raking across Derek's chestplate, leaving deep furrows in the metal. Derek stumbled back, his knife clattering from his grip. The Emperor pressed his advantage, hammering at Derek's defenses with a flurry of slashes and punches. But Derek refused to fall. He met the Emperor blow for blow, his own fists and feet lashing out with desperate strength. He could feel himself tiring, his wounds sapping his strength. But he pushed through the pain, driven by the knowledge that if he failed, humanity was doomed. In a last desperate gambit, Derek threw himself forward, tackling the Emperor around the waist. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, grappling and punching. Derek managed to wrap his hands around the Emperor's throat, squeezing with all his might. The Draconis thrashed and bucked, his claws scrabbling at Derek's arms, but the human held on grimly, pouring all his remaining strength into his grip. The Emperor's struggles began to weaken, his cybernetic eye flickering. Derek felt a surge of triumph. Just a few seconds more. Suddenly the chamber doors burst open. Derek looked up, expecting to see human soldiers pouring in to secure the Emperor, but instead He saw Janus, the traitorous Draconis youth, flanked by a contingent of elite guards. Janus surveyed the scene with a smirk, his serpentine eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "Well done, human," he said, clapping slowly. "You've saved me the trouble of killing the old fool myself." Derek released his grip on the Emperor's throat, rising to face Janus. You planned this from the start, didn't you? The false intelligence, leading us into a trap." "Of course," Janus sneered. "The Emperor's time is over. He's grown weak, complacent. The Draconis need a new leader, one with vision and strength, one who can crush the human rebellion once and for all." Derek looked at the proffered hand, then back at Janus's smug, expectant face. He spat, the glob of saliva splattering across the traitor's scales. "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees," Derek snarled, "especially not beside a backstabbing snake like you." Janus recoiled, his face contorting with rage. "So be it, ape. You can die with your precious Emperor." With a hiss, he gestured to his guards. "Kill them both." The elite Draconis moved forward, energy blades humming to life. Derek looked around frantically, searching for a weapon. His eyes fell upon a fallen Draconis banner pole, its sharp, spear-like tip glinting on the floor. He dived for it, snatching it up and bringing it to bear just as the first guard reached him. The Draconis' blade scythed down, but Derek caught it on the haft of the banner pole. Sparks flew as he shoved the guard back, then spun the makeshift spear and rammed it through the alien's chest. The Draconis shrieked, thrashing as it died. Derek wrenched the spear free, whirling to face the next attacker. Two more guards fell to his desperate whirlwind assault, their blood splattering the chamber walls. But there were too many, and he was already wounded and weary. A blade slipped past his guard, carving a deep gash across his ribs. Another stabbed into his thigh, sending him stumbling. As he fell to one knee, panting and bleeding, he looked up to see Janus standing over the Emperor's prone form. The traitor drew a ceremonial dagger from his belt, raising it high. "The Emperor is dead," Janus declared, his voice ringing through the chamber. "Long live the Emperor!" With a savage grin, he plunged the dagger into the old Draconis' heart. The Emperor convulsed once, then lay still, his cybernetic eye going dark. Derek watched, his vision beginning to blur as Janus turned to face him. The traitor's face was a twisted mask of triumph and cruelty. Derek's hand slipped into a hidden pocket of his armor, his fingers closing around a small cylindrical object, the transmitter. With a final, defiant glare, he pressed the activation stud. Far above, in the battle-scarred skies, the human fleet received his signal. Every remaining ship oriented on the coordinates, missile bays snapping open, targeting solutions locking on. Derek saw the first missiles impact through the chamber's high windows, the palace walls shuddering with the force of the blasts. Janus whirled, his eyes going wide with sudden understanding and fear. "No," the traitor whispered. "No!" The chamber ceiling collapsed in a rain of fire and rubble, burying Janus and his guards beneath tons of twisted metal and shattered stone. Derek felt the floor give way beneath him, and then he was falling, tumbling through empty air amidst the wreckage of the palace. His last sight, before the darkness claimed him, was of the Draconis ships in the sky above, their formations crumbling into chaos as the human fleet pressed the attack. The Empire was broken, its rulers dead or scattered. Against all odds, against all expectation, humanity had won. As the smoke from the devastated palace curled into the alien sky, the human fleet descended like avenging angels. Dropships disgorged streams of battle-hardened soldiers, their boots thudding on the rubble-strewn streets of the capital. They fanned out with practiced efficiency, securing key buildings, infrastructure, choke points. Resistance was scattered, disorganized. Draconis warriors laid down arms, emerging from bolt holes with claws raised in surrender. Those who fled were let go, scurrying into the shadows to nurse their wounds and their shattered pride. In the ruins of the palace, a squad of human troops picked through the wreckage, scanners probing, searching. A shout echoed over the comms. They'd found something. The soldiers converged on a slab of fallen masonry, heaving it aside to reveal a hidden chamber, its walls lined with flickering monitors and humming machinery. There, amidst the tangle of twisted metal and sparking wires, lay a battered human form. They hauled him out as gently as they could, wincing at the wounds that marred his broken body. His armor was shredded, his flesh scorched and bleeding, but the faint rise and fall of his chest told them he still clung to life, stubborn to the last. A medical team rushed him to their flagship's infirmary, working with frantic urgency to stabilize him, to bring him back from the brink. For days, he lingered in the liminal space between life and death, machines breathing for him, knitting his bones and flesh back together. And all the while, whispers of his deeds spread like wildfire throughout the galaxy. To the once subject races, he was a liberator, a hero straight out of legend, the one who'd broken the chains of millennia, who'd cast down the Draconis from their bloody throne. They spoke his name with reverence, painted his likeness on banners and starship hulls. A human, a single human, had done what entire civilizations had failed to do. He'd shown the galaxy that the Draconis could bleed, that they could die. But to the Empire's remnants, scattered and leaderless, he was the spectre of their downfall made flesh. They cursed his name, even as they fled before the human onslaught. This upstart, this ape from a backwater world, had torn out the heart of their glorious dominion. They would not forget, they would not forgive. As the weeks turned and the human-led forces consolidated their hold on the Draconis core worlds, Derek remained lost in the depths of a coma. The medics could heal his body, but his mind wandered in realms beyond their reach. Perhaps, some murmured, it was better this way. Let him rest. Let him have some measure of peace after all he'd endured, all he'd sacrificed. But peace, it seemed, would not come so easily to the wounded galaxy. From the far fringes of Draconis space, a new threat stirred. A warlord, one of the Emperor's most fanatical lieutenants, had gathered the Empire's shattered armies to his banner. Driven by dreams of vengeance and conquest reborn, he struck out at the fragile new order, raiding frontier colonies, slaughtering the weak, the defenseless. Refugees poured into the liberated systems, their worlds burning behind them, their cries for aid and protection echoing in the halls of power. The fledgling government, a tenuous coalition of human leadership, and the newly freed races, found themselves facing a grim reality. The Draconis, even broken and diminished, would not relinquish their hold so easily. If this new menace was not met and defeated swiftly, decisively, all they'd bled for would be lost. They needed a champion, a symbol of defiance and indomitable will, a name to rally the fearful masses and give them hope. They needed Derek Ross. In the sterile hush of the infirmary, medics and machines stood vigil over the comatose warrior. Generals and politicians came and went, their words urgent, pleading. "Wake up," they begged the silent, unmoving figure. "Wake up and lead us once more. The galaxy needs you. We need you." But Derek slept on, lost in the silent spaces of his own battered mind, unaware of the gathering storm that threatened to engulf all he'd fought for. And with each passing day, the forces of tyranny grew bolder, stronger, their shadow falling ever darker across the stars. In the halls of power, grim-faced leaders pored over battle plans and casualty reports, a cold dread settling in their hearts. They'd come so far, paid so steep a price for their freedom, to see it all crumble away now, to fail at this final hurdle, it was too horrific to contemplate. And so they redoubled their efforts, mustering every ship, every soldier they could spare. If Derek could not lead them, they would fight on regardless. They would stand against the tide, no matter the cost. But in their most secret hearts, a desperate prayer echoed, a mantra whispered like a talisman against the darkness. "Wake up, Derek Ross. Wake up and save us all." In the sterile hush of the infirmary, Derek Ross stirred, his eyes fluttering open for the first time in weeks. He blinked against the harsh lights, his body aching with the memory of his injuries. Slowly he pushed himself upright, ignoring the protests of his stiff muscles. A medic rushed to his side, her face a mix of surprise and relief. "Captain Ross, you're awake. We didn't think—" How long? Derek croaked, his voice rough from disuse. Almost a month, the medic replied. We weren't sure if you'd ever... She trailed off, busying herself with checking his vitals. Derek swung his legs over the side of the bed, testing his weight. He felt weak but determined. I need to see the general. Now. Minutes later, he stood before General Graves, his body still wrapped in bandages. The older man regarded him with a somber expression. It's good to see you on your feet, Captain, Graves said, but I'm afraid the situation has taken a turn for the worse. He proceeded to brief Derek on the Draconis loyalists, the raids, the mounting chaos. Derek listened, his jaw clenching with each new detail. I know you've been through hell, son, Graves said. No one would blame you if you wanted to sit this one out. Derek shook his head. No, sir, I started this fight. I intend to finish it. And so, mere days after awakening, Derek found himself on the bridge of a human warship, surrounded by a hand-picked team of elite soldiers, both human and alien. They pored over star maps and intelligence reports, tracking the warlord's movements. He's hitting key infrastructure, a Kilidar lieutenant growled. Shipyards, supply depots, trying to rebuild the Draconis war machine. And this, a human sergeant said, pointing to a grainy image. Recon drones caught him raiding ancient Draconis weapons caches. He's arming up for something big. Over the next weeks, Derek and his team launched a series of daring raids. They struck at the heart of the warlord's operations, sabotaging factories, intercepting shipments, gathering intel. On a smoldering ruin of a weapons foundry, Derek found a data core miraculously intact among the debris. As his tech specialist cracked its encryption, Derek felt a chill run down his spine. Sir, the specialist said, her voice tight, you need to see this. The core contained plans, schematics, for a weapon of terrifying power. A planet killer, fueled by an ancient alien artifact. And the warlord was close, so close to acquiring the final piece. We have to stop him, Derek said, whatever it takes. They raced to the artifact's location, a long-dead world orbiting a dying star. But as they made planetfall, all hell broke loose. Draconis ships swarmed from the shadows, weapons blazing. Derek's team fought back with everything they had, but the ambush had been too well planned, too precise. In the chaos, Derek found himself cut off, alone. He fought like a man possessed, but the Draconis were too many. A blow to the head sent him to his knees, his vision swimming. When he came to, he was in a dark cell, his weapons gone. Footsteps approached, and the door hissed open. The warlord stood before him, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. Derek Ross, the warlord hissed, the hero of the rebellion. How fitting that you should die here on the eve of my greatest triumph. Derek struggled to his feet. Why are you doing this? The war is over. The Empire is gone. You think I fight for the Empire? The warlord snarled. I fight for survival. I was a slave once, like so many others. The Draconis Empire was cruel, yes, but it was order. Without it there is only chaos. Only the strong survive. It doesn't have to be like that, Derek said. We can build something better together. The warlord laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You still don't understand. There is no together. There is only the victor and the vanquished. He raised his blade, the edge glinting in the dim light. Derek tensed, preparing for the end. Suddenly the cell shook with the force of an explosion. Alarms blared, and the warlord whirled, his eyes wide. Derek seized his chance, lunging forward and grappling for the blade. They struggled, trading blows, as the sounds of battle raged outside. With a final desperate effort, Derek wrenched the blade free and buried it in the warlord's chest. The Draconis staggered back, his hand clutching the wound. You think this changes anything? He gasped. You've won nothing. The strong will always rise. With that he slumped to the floor, his eyes going glassy. Derek stood over him, breathing hard, as the cell door burst open and his team rushed in, weapons at the ready. Captain, his second-in-command cried, thank the stars, we thought we'd lost you. Derek shook his head, his gaze still fixed on the warlord's body. "It's not over," he said, "not yet." Together they raced through the warlord's ship, fighting past the last pockets of resistance. They found the artifact in the main hold, pulsing with an eerie light. Derek hefted a plasma charge, his face grim. "Stand clear," he ordered. "We're ending this now." The explosion rocked the ship, reducing the artifact to molten slag. As the team made their escape, Derek could only hope it had been enough. In the days that followed, as the warlord's forces scattered and surrendered, Derek couldn't shake the sense of unease. The warlord's words echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the fragility of peace. He stood on the bridge of his ship, staring out at the stars when his second approached. "We've received a transmission from High Command," she said. "They're calling us back. Seems there's a new threat on the horizon." Derek sighed, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. There always is. He turned to face his crew, his eyes hard with determination. "Plot a course," he ordered. "We have work to do." Aritumbi Santi Yorksa. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.